Picture this. A beige carpeted clubhouse packed to suffocation, neighbors fanning themselves with folded HOA notices, the stench of burnt coffee drifting from a plastic urn in the corner, 38 angry residents shifting in their metal chairs, news cameras crammed in the back, fluorescent bulbs buzzing like hornets overhead. At the front of the room, Brenda McAllister, the HOA president who fancied herself queen of this little kingdom, slammed her gavel against the folding table. "Order! This community will not tolerate negligence." Her voice ricocheted off the low ceiling as she pointed directly at me. Me. The woman she thought was just another tired homeowner behind on dues. The woman she thought she could bulldoze into silence. I stayed seated, calm, hands folded on my lap, listening as she barked accusations that had no basis in reality. My supposed unpaid violations, my failure to comply with bylaws, my alleged threat to neighborhood values. She wanted me embarrassed, humiliated, isolated. But here's what Brenda didn't know. I wasn't just Mrs. Eleanor Cross, widowed homeowner of 14 Maple Ridge Lane. I wasn't just another target for her predatory fines. For 22 years, I had worn a black robe and carried the full weight of federal authority behind my words. For 22 years, lawyers had trembled and defendants had broken down as I passed judgment in courtrooms across the state. And now Brenda's little scheme had crossed my path. I watched the sweat bead along her forehead as she whipped the crowd into anger. Neighbors muttering, some shaking their heads at me, others too scared to make eye contact. This was her theater, her stage. She thought tonight would be the final act, me cornered, forced into paying, or worse, watching my home taken away. But then came the moment. I rose slowly, letting the chair scrape the linoleum in a sound that cut across her shouting. Every head turned as I reached into my leather bag, pulled out the black wallet I had carried for over 2 decades, and flipped it open with a practiced hand. The room froze. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice even, cutting through the stale air. "My name is Eleanor Cross, and for 22 years I have served as a federal judge of the United States District Court." Silence. Absolute silence. I held up the badge. The camera zoomed in. The HOA president's face drained of color as if someone had pulled the life out of her veins. A murmur spread through the room, neighbors whispering, shifting, some gasping. And then, as if the air itself shifted, the sheriff's deputy standing at Brenda's side, her hand-picked enforcer, took 3 deliberate steps away from her. Because suddenly, this wasn't just an HOA dispute. It was federal, it was criminal, and everyone in that room knew the game had changed. But before we get to that night, let me rewind. My name is Eleanor Cross. And though I've been a federal judge for more than 2 decades, 3 years ago I wanted nothing more than peace. To close the courtroom doors behind me each evening, drive back to my modest cul-de-sac in Maple Ridge Estates, and pretend I was just another neighbor who complained about weeds or garbage pickup delays. Maple Ridge looked perfect when I first moved in. A neat little community of 150 homes built in the early 2000s, lawns trimmed like green velvet, kids biking in circles until sunset. HOA dues were a manageable $95 a month, covering the pool, clubhouse, and landscaping. Most neighbors were retired, couples or young families just starting out. Nobody asked questions about jobs, and I didn't offer details. I was simply Eleanor at number 14, the widow who brought lemon bars to the block party and nodded politely when people waved. And for almost 3 years, that anonymity worked, until the day my husband died. Losing Charles broke something. In me, I can't even describe. He had been my partner through every brutal trial, the man who kept me grounded when the gavel felt heavy in my hand. Without him, I felt hollow, barely functioning. My days blurred between the courtroom and the empty silence of my home. I stopped tending the garden. I left stacks of unopened mail on the counter. I went through motions, but inside I was drowning. That's when Brenda struck. The first letter arrived 2 weeks after Charles's funeral. A stiff, legal-looking envelope crammed with accusations. Lawn too long, $50 fine. Trash cans visible from the street, $75 fine. Mailbox paint chipped, $125 fine. All petty, all false. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a clerical error. I called the number listed, left voicemails that were never returned. But the letters multiplied. Certified mail, threats of liens. Words like foreclosure proceedings, underlined in bold. I still remember standing in my kitchen, black dress still hanging by the door from Charles's memorial, tears not yet dry, and staring at the words, pay within 10 days, or risk loss of property. Grief wasn't enough for Brenda. She wanted blood. But here's the thing about spending decades in a federal courtroom. You start to see patterns. Lies never come alone. They travel in packs. Schemes always leave trails if you know where to look. And what I began to uncover in Maple Ridge Estates was not just harassment. It was a machine. A system built to strip grieving, distracted or vulnerable homeowners of their property and funnel it into the hands of one person. The HOA president who thought she was untouchable, and she never expected her latest victim to be a federal judge. The next morning, sunlight cut across my living room like a spotlight on an empty stage. I sat there in my black robe, untouched coffee cooling on the table, staring at that violation letter as though it were written in a foreign language. I'd spent my entire career untangling legal fabrications, fraudulent contracts, doctored evidence, false testimony. But never had I imagined I'd face such corruption in my own quiet cul-de-sac. The envelope lay beside 3 others. Final notices, past due, foreclosure warning, each thicker than the last, as if the weight of paper was meant to crush me into silence. They claimed I owed $3,200 in compounded fines, for grass that had never grown above regulation height, for mailbox paint that had never been touched, for shrubbery I had documented with time-stamped emails. I looked out my window toward the manicured lawns lining our street. Brenda's Lexus was parked across from Florence Murphy's modest beige ranch. Florence was 82, her husband dead less than a year, her hands arthritic and her eyesight dim. She shuffled to her mailbox daily, collecting notices with the same trembling confusion I now felt. And I realized this wasn't just paperwork. This was a weapon aimed at the vulnerable, the grieving, the distracted. That afternoon I drove down to the county clerk's office. The air smelled of dust and toner, the kind of scent that clings to old records. I pulled deeds, foreclosure filings, and sales transfers. My fingers skimmed hundreds of brittle pages until a pattern began to glow like a neon sign. 3 homes foreclosed in the last 6 months, all sold under market value, all purchased by a single entity, KCS Holdings, LLC. Registered agent, David Kirkpatrick. And Brenda Kirkpatrick was no stranger in this town. Her family had built half the developments in the county. She wasn't simply enforcing HOA bylaws. She was funneling property into her family's business empire. The realization made my stomach turn. They weren't sloppy, they were strategic. Target widows, target retirees, target families in crisis. Push violation notices until the fines stack high enough, then force foreclosure. Buy cheap, flip, profit. On paper, it looked like routine community enforcement. In reality, it was legalized theft dressed in bylaws and signatures. By evening, my resolve hardened. I didn't just want to protect my home. I wanted to dismantle the scheme entirely. I gathered evidence into color-coded binders, page protectors clicking into place with a rhythm that steadied my shaking hands. Years of courtroom battles had prepared me for this moment. The only difference, this case had found me. But Brenda struck quicker than I anticipated. The very next day, tucked inside my mailbox, was a neon yellow flyer, bold print, cheap paper. Emergency HOA meeting, Tuesday, 1 p.m., Community Center. Topic: Ongoing violations threatening neighborhood standards. That phrase echoed in my head like a gavel hitting hardwood. Ongoing violations. That meant me. They weren't content to bleed me quietly with paperwork. They wanted a spectacle, a public shaming. I knew the script already. Brenda would summon her loyalists, spin stories about declining property values, and paint me as negligent, irresponsible, even dangerous to the neighborhood. She would sneer about my absent months, gloss over hospice visits, and frame me as unfit to own in her community. But here's the part she didn't know. For 2 years, I had been the quiet neighbor, the one who blended into the background. But in that room, under those buzzing fluorescent lights, she wasn't going to face a tired widow or a grieving daughter. She was about to face a federal judge with 18 years of experience dismantling liars piece by piece. And when I revealed exactly who I was, the foundation of her empire would crack in front of every neighbor, every whispering gossip, every potential ally. The meeting wasn't going to be their ambush. It was going to be my courtroom, and this time, the verdict wouldn't be in Brenda Kirkpatrick's favor. The day of the meeting arrived cloaked in the kind of gray skies that carry both silence and warning. I parked my car outside the community center, its cracked asphalt littered with fallen pine needles. The building itself was nothing more than a beige box with aluminum siding. But today it might as well have been a courthouse. And I knew. What happened inside would decide whether I kept my home or whether Brenda tightened her grip around the neighborhood like a noose. When I stepped inside, the air was stale with disinfectant and faint perfume, the kind worn by women who had long since turned gossip into sport. Rows of folding chairs lined the room, already filled with neighbors shifting nervously, whispering under their breath. At the front, a long plastic table stood like a judge's bench, and behind it sat Brenda, lips pursed, pearls glinting under the buzzing fluorescent lights. She clutched a manila folder thick with evidence, though I knew half of it would be fabricated, exaggerated, or outright lies. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice dripping with authority that no one had officially granted her. "We're here today to address a serious ongoing violation of our community standards. One homeowner has repeatedly disregarded rules designed to keep our neighborhood safe, clean, and valuable." I felt dozens of eyes shift toward me, some with curiosity, others with quiet sympathy. Florence Murphy sat 3 rows back, her fragile frame hunched in a cardigan far too thin for the air conditioning blasting overhead. She gave me a small nod, an unspoken gesture of solidarity that steadied my nerves. Brenda laid out her case with theatrical precision, grass left untrimmed, mailbox paint fading, hedges encroaching onto a neighbor's lot. Each violation was accompanied by grainy photos printed in black and white, none more convincing than a shadow on pavement. She spoke with the rhythm of someone who believed her performance would be enough to convict without question. Then she paused, tilted her head, and smiled that practiced smile. "This homeowner's negligence puts us all at risk. Declining property values, unsafe conditions, and a dangerous precedent for ignoring our bylaws. If we allow this behavior to go unchecked, who knows what will become of our community?" It was the opening she wanted, the moment to rally the crowd. But it was also the moment I had been waiting for. I stood slowly, letting the metal legs of my chair scrape against the floor with purpose. Every head turned, whispers cut off mid-sentence. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled a leather binder from my bag, its polished edges catching the harsh light. "My name," I said evenly, "is Judge Eleanor Hayes, retired federal district court, 18 years presiding over fraud, corruption, and racketeering cases." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air seemed to pause. Brenda's smile faltered, her pearls suddenly looking less like a symbol of authority and more like a noose around her neck. "I have spent the last 2 weeks documenting every notice, every photograph, and every fine levied against me," I continued. "And what I found doesn't just concern my home, it concerns every single homeowner here. I stepped toward the front, binder in hand, flipping open to the pages I had marked with yellow tabs. Property transfers, foreclosure filings, deeds. 3 homes in the past 6 months, forced into foreclosure over fabricated violations, all resold under market value, all purchased by KCS Holdings, LLC. Does anyone here know who owns that company? A murmur swept the room. Heads turned toward Brenda, whose face drained of color. Yes, I said firmly, locking eyes with her. The Kirkpatrick family. Brenda's family. This isn't about grass or paint or hedges. This is about a deliberate scheme to drive vulnerable homeowners into foreclosure so their company can buy cheap and profit at your expense. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, a few shouted curses. Brenda slammed her hand on the table, her voice rising above the noise. This is outrageous. Slander. You have no right. No right! I cut her off, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. I have every right, and so do they. I gestured to the room, to Florence clutching her purse, to the young couple in, the back row exchanging worried glances, to the middle-aged man gripping his folded arms tighter with every word. For the first time, Brenda looked cornered. Not by me, but by the very people she had counted on to follow her blindly. This community deserves the truth, I said. And if necessary, I'll make sure the county, the courts, and the state attorney general hear it. The weight of my words lingered in the charged air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Florence began to clap, soft, trembling, but defiant. One by one, others joined, until the sterile room echoed with the sound of rebellion. And in that moment, I knew the balance of power had shifted, but I also knew Brenda Kirkpatrick wasn't done. Not yet. That night, sleep did not come easily. My binder of documents sat heavy on the nightstand, pages brimming with proof that Brenda's empire was built on intimidation and greed. The applause from the meeting still rang in my ears, but so did the look in her eyes when I spoke her family's name aloud. It was not fear, it was fury. By dawn, my phone began buzzing, messages from neighbors, some apologizing for their silence in the past, others asking what they could do to help. For the first time, people saw through the polished pearls and clipped tone. Brenda wasn't a protector of property values. She was a predator. And now, her mask had slipped. But predators don't retreat easily. 2 days later, a white SUV idled outside my driveway. The same vehicle circled twice more that morning, its tinted windows betraying no driver. When I stepped out to retrieve the mail, it rolled slowly past, its presence deliberate, a warning. By evening, things escalated. Florence called me in tears, her voice breaking through the receiver. "There's a letter on my porch," she whispered. No envelope, no name, just 3 words. Stop helping her. I drove to her house, heart pounding, headlights cutting through the darkened cul-de-sacs. The note lay folded neatly on her welcome mat, a message as chilling in its simplicity as it was in its intent. I recognized the stationery immediately. It was the same embossed letterhead Brenda used for HOA notices. Subtle enough for plausible deniability, but sharp enough to slice through Florence's fragile nerves. Inside, she sat trembling in her recliner, wringing her hands. "I can't afford to fight them, Eleanor. If they take my house, they won't," I assured her, though inside I felt the gnawing truth. Brenda was cornered, and a cornered animal always lashes out. The very next day, the retaliation turned official. A notice taped to my door in bold red letters. Final violation before legal action. This time, the offense was almost laughable. Wind chimes hanging on my porch. According to Brenda's committee, they violated aesthetic harmony. But beneath the absurdity lay a calculated threat. Brenda wanted me distracted, tangled, in paperwork and fines, too busy to continue pulling at the threads of her scheme. Instead, I doubled down. I contacted a friend from my days on the bench, a county clerk who still owed me a favor. Within 48 hours, I had copies of filings Brenda thought no one would ever uncover, proof of the pattern I had already suspected. Each foreclosure connected back to her family's shell company, KCS Holdings. Each auction, a paper shuffle, designed to look legitimate. But exposing her on paper wasn't enough. I needed allies. So I began hosting quiet gatherings in my living room. At first, only 3 or 4 neighbors came, sitting stiffly on my worn leather couch. Florence brought cookies, her hands still shaking but her resolve stronger than I'd ever seen. A young mother from the next street over arrived with her toddler asleep on her shoulder, whispering that she feared her family was next. As the nights went on, the group grew. 10, then 15. Some came in whispers, slipping through the side gate to avoid being seen. Others arrived defiantly, parking their cars in plain sight. We spread documents across my dining table, maps of foreclosed properties, timelines of violations, letters taped to doors at suspiciously convenient intervals. And as I spoke, as I laid out Brenda's tactics piece by piece, I saw something change in their eyes. Fear gave way to fury. For years, Brenda had ruled with intimidation. Now that power was unraveling, but the battle lines were drawn. She still had the HOA board, the funds, the connections, and the arrogance of someone who had gotten away with too much for too long. We were just homeowners, ordinary people. But sometimes, ordinary people are the most dangerous when they finally decide enough is enough. And deep down, I knew Brenda was already preparing her next move. The HOA board convened on a sweltering Thursday evening. Folding. Chairs lined the community hall, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The air was thick with tension, neighbors whispering as Brenda stood at the front, polished and composed in her signature blazer. She smiled, but it was the smile of someone sharpening a blade. "This meeting," she began, her voice echoing, "is to address the ongoing violations of Mrs. Eleanor Hart. Her refusal to comply with the community guidelines threatens the harmony of our neighborhood. Therefore, I move to authorize foreclosure proceedings." A hush fell. Some gasped, others nodded nervously. The board members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable, but Brenda's presence loomed too large. She was betting on fear. Again. Stood. My binder under my arm, my voice steady. "Before this vote proceeds, I suggest we review some documents." I laid them across the folding table. County filings, foreclosure deeds, corporate registrations. Each stamped, dated, undeniable. "Every foreclosure in the last 5 years," I said, "ends up in the hands of a shell company. KCS Holdings, a company managed by Brenda's own son-in-law. Families forced out, homes flipped for profit. This board has not been protecting the community. It has been a feeding trough for Brenda's family business." Murmurs surged into angry voices. People leaned forward, eyes wide as the puzzle pieces finally clicked into place. Florence, frail but determined, raised her voice from the back. She tried to take my home too. If Eleanor hadn't stepped in, I'd be gone. Brenda's mask cracked, her face flushed, lips trembling between rage and denial. "These are lies!" she shouted. "Baseless accusations." But before she could finish, one of the officers, yes, real officers, stepped into the room. Not HOA rent-a-cops, but county deputies. They'd been investigating quietly for weeks, thanks to a tip from a very determined retired judge. The lead deputy stepped forward, holding his own stack of papers. "We've seen enough." For the first time, Brenda stumbled. Her voice faltered. The room, once under her command, now buzzed with the electricity of rebellion. Neighbors who had once bowed to her demands now rose from their chairs, arms folded, eyes locked in quiet defiance. The deputies escorted her out, her shouts echoing down the hall, a queen dethroned in front of her kingdom. When the door slammed, shut, silence lingered. Then, one by one, people began to clap. Not for me, but for themselves. For finding their voices. For breaking free from years of fear. Florence leaned against me, tears glistening in her tired eyes. "You saved us, Eleanor," she whispered, but I shook my head. No. We saved each other. As the crowd dispersed, golden light from the setting sun filtered through the hall windows, casting long shadows that felt less threatening now, almost protective. The battle was over, but the lesson would remain. When power is abused, silence is complicity. And when ordinary people decide to rise, no tyrant, no matter how polished or cruel, can hold them forever. That night, I returned to my porch. The wind chimes swayed gently in the breeze, defying the notice still taped to my door. Somewhere, in the distance, I thought I heard Florence's laughter, free of fear for the first time in years, and as the last light slipped behind the trees, I finally allowed myself a smile. Justice, though late, had come home.